Welcome back to the MindGoals Podcast, hosted by yours truly, Siobhan Higgins, sport and performance psychology consultant, professional soccer player, yoga instructor, and soccer coach. The MindGoals Podcast is a space that I hold for myself, athletes, and other athletic personnel so that we can converse and discuss how we acquired the mindset that we have today, all with the goal in mind that any listeners or viewers can also improve their own mindset. If you're looking around watching this video podcast, you might notice I'm in a different location. That is because Taylor, my producer, hooked me up with somebody super incredible to be able to discuss how stem cells can possibly help athletes. So today I am in the home of Hope Bioscience, and I have a special guest, the CEO of Hope Bioscience, Miss Donna Chang. Hello.
Hello.
I would say welcome, but really I'm here in your home.
Welcome.
Thank you. So today we're going to get to know you a little bit more in Hope Bioscience. I am very unfamiliar with stem cell research, so I am really eager to learn more. As an athlete myself and someone who has undergone 2 ACL reconstructions, I'm always looking to improve the body. And so I would really hope that you could explain a little bit more to me about stem cells, what they all entail. So I have a lot of questions, but first, could you start by telling me a little bit about Hope Biosciences and your role as a CEO, and then what inspired you to kind of focus on stem cell research?
Lots of good questions. Where do I start? So a little bit about me. I am the CEO of Hope Bio. Hope Bio started about 8 years ago.
Okay.
We are a stem cell research company. We are in the development and delivery. So we do all of the manufacturing of the stem cell therapies that we develop here.
Wow.
I have a background in biology, human biology, and biotechnology.
Okay, very interesting.
Many people think I'm a physician. I'm not. I happen to know a lot about disease because of my job. I have to understand everything about the cells that we make here. So by that, we've used our cells for so many different disease indications, primarily the brain. So I'm more versed in the brain than anything else. But our cells have been used in over 40 different, FDA authorized protocols, which means that we have to understand, like, fundamentally how these cells work in all these different diseases.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. And did you ever see yourself having a company like this?
No.
Yeah. What was your goal primarily?
First, to live a comfortable life and get a paycheck from somebody. Having a company was definitely not the goal. We say that it was a means to an end. And what that means is, in the United States, if you want access to stem cell treatment, at least the kind that we're talking about today, and I'm happy to kind of go over the differences, but if you want to get your hands on real stem cells, then you have to get this little thing called FDA approval.
Okay.
And how does one get that? You don't just walk into FDA and get it. Normally you have to apply, and the entities that apply are either, universities or companies. So that was the birth of Hope Bio. It was, we have to achieve this FDA approval so that the masses can access these cells, which in the big picture is what we're working towards.
Wow. And so this, for me, when I first entered college, I was a bio major for 2 years. Okay. So it's very minimal knowledge on cells. But I've been in lab settings before. So you have a lab here, correct?
Yep.
Okay, very cool.
It's not your traditional research and development lab. We do have those kinds of spaces here, but this is primarily a biomanufacturing lab, which means that we are producing the treatments, the medicine, the cell medicine, And we are testing it here for quality and releasing it from here. So the entire production process happens here.
Okay, wow, brilliant. So it's an all-in-one research company.
And we also 4 years ago started a nonprofit research foundation.
Oh, really?
And it was primarily for clinical research because we at the people who started Hope Bio, we are cell biology people, so we know cells very well. But when it comes to the application of these cells into humans, that's a totally different kind of skill set.
Right.
And so when thinking about what kind of people should come together to do that kind of work, it was more research, human research related. And also we thought it would fit better in a nonprofit structure. And so that's why we have a research foundation here. And throughout today, you'll see patients walking in. They're mostly all clinical trial participants coming in to receive cells and participate in trial.
Wow. Okay, great. And I have so many follow-up questions, but one that piqued my mind because I've seen the facility through Taylor, and I've seen the podcast, and I know that would you call them a patient that comes in?
Sure.
So patients or people that do come in to receive stem cells, what type of people do you see, or what are they treating?
All kinds of conditions. Right now, we are actively studying Parkinson's disease. We have one of the largest stem cell programs for Parkinson's in the country. And we're about to start our 7th protocol in that. And so we have many people with Parkinson's coming in. We just finished a clinical trial for multiple sclerosis. And so we saw a lot of MS patients. And then in there's a program called Right to Try, which allows patients with life-threatening conditions who are authorized by their physicians to have access to this medicine. We get those kinds of people coming in as well. So those are the true, patients who are in the most need that we are able to serve here. Yeah.
Okay. And I do have a question down the line, but honestly, immediately the question that came to mind was, when do you see it being accessible for other people that are not just in life-threatening situations?
Yeah, the point of a clinical trial is to prove that the medicine works in a certain population. So what's going to happen is, at first, let's say that population is multiple sclerosis, then the medicine will get approved for that disease specifically. And what will likely happen are groups that don't have that disease per se, but perhaps diseases similar to that, or maybe just a neurological condition that has no solution, then chances are they will start accessing it, sort of what we call off-label. And as this happens, more and more people will have access in that way. And then as the drug, I hate to call it a drug, but it's defined as a drug. As the drug gets approved for more and more conditions, at some point, I believe in such thing as like critical mass. At a certain point, perhaps rules will change, and it's not rules in terms of like, oh, this should be favored in a certain way. It's more that technology is moving at a pace where our regulations aren't able to keep up.
Right.
And so at some point, we think that the regulations do have to be revised. A lot of the technologies that we're talking about right now didn't exist when the rules were written.
Yes.
And so I think there needs to be some revision. And at some point, I think there will be. But there needs to be a comfort. Certainly with any medicine, right, there needs to be a comfort on safety. And you should know efficacy. Right? If you're going to pay for a medicine, you should know what it's going to do for you.
Yes.
Right? So I do think that we need those two elements still.
Yeah, to be able to. Okay. Yeah. And how long do you think that might take? I guess just a ballpark guess.
Can I get my crystal ball?
I know. Yeah.
I have no idea. Every day feels very long. And so I don't know. I think from my seat right now, I do think within 2 to 3 years, we will see something, particularly in a condition that has no solution right now. There's no drug, nothing that can help this particular condition. I'm not going to give it away because I'm just going to keep that to me. But I do think that though a condition like that really has is an unmet need, will likely get approved first in the near term, I think.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. I can see where you're going with that. I can see what you're saying. So how do stem cells compare to traditional treatments, like surgical intervention or just some sort of physical therapy?
Great question. First, I think let's compare the mechanism. Okay, so let's say when you take a pill or you go in for surgery, there's something very specific that's being fixed, right? Or in the case of a pill, a particular chemical compound that you're trying to put into the body to evoke a chemical response, right? Some kind of a response. Let's say it's like an anti-inflammatory, then it's like one compound that's going to reduce inflammation, right? Albeit temporarily, but that's what it does.
Yeah.
So there's specific function. Stem cells are, just a basic definition of stem cells, are cells that have no identity. Okay. They're essentially like a blank piece of paper. It could become anything. And so your body is made up of lots of different cells. I mean, just looking at you, you've got hair cells and, skin cells and muscle cells. You have all these different cell types. Where did they all come from? So they came from a stem cell. The OG stem cell is an embryonic stem cell. So when you were forming in your mother's womb, you're essentially a big ball of stem cells.
Yeah.
And every single one of those cells ended up becoming one finalized cell type. Like all of your organs are made up of various cell types, and somehow your body knew how to transform. After you're born, you still have, they're not embryonic anymore because now you're not an embryo, but what we call adult stem cells. So you have those cells running around you everywhere. And they're actually primarily made in your bone marrow, but we are constantly regenerating. I was, before our conversation today, I was sort of thinking about we spend a lot of time trying to convince, whether it be regulators or doctors or whoever we're talking to, about the mechanism and how these cells work. It's so hard to believe because you can't really see it.
Right.
Mechanistically in a lab, you can take the stem cells and you can make them do certain things, but we will never get the full picture of what they do, because when they go into the body, it's sort of a mystery. There are so many different roads that they can take. So we can predict, we can say, well, this stem cell is going to go in and they're going to become a ligament, but they can also become bone. They can also become a new blood vessel. Like who's to say how they're going to function in that particular condition? That's what makes stem cells very complicated.
Right.
But they have the ability to do so many different things. And just from disease and injury, I would say their major functions are, one, their regenerative capacity, so their ability to become different tissues and cell types, their ability to control inflammation. They're naturally anti-inflammatory.
Okay.
And it's because they're constantly regulating the immune system. And if they're regulating the immune system, your immune system is directly correlated to your the level of inflammation you have in your body. So it's constantly regulating that. It's also like a mini drug factory. It, just like that pill that you're taking with that one compound, the stem cell itself, from what we've measured, and maybe technology hasn't even caught up to measure every single thing that's secreted by the cell, but we've already measured 10,000 different components that the cell secretes. So it's like, can you imagine getting 10,000 bottles to fix something when one cell can produce these 10,000 different compounds?
Yeah, that's incredible.
Many of which we don't even know what these compounds do, right? It's just like natural. Your cells just produce these things. That's called a paracrine effect. But anyway, all these different things combined, they also stop cell death and inadvertently cells becoming bad tissue. Like, how often do we go through surgery and then you have some fibrosis happen,
right,
and then you have scar tissue formation, and that causes a whole slew of other issues. Stem cells prevent that too. So in which way will stem cells help a condition? In so many ways. But that's how it differs from, a traditional sort of more one-sided approach. And we're always hoping for the best. Like, if we have this surgical intervention that all goes well and you heal completely. And my aha moment today was sort of, we fundamentally believe in stem cells, whether we are thinking about it or not. If you think about, you break your leg, what can they do for you other than position you properly and put a cast on? Mm-hmm. By putting a cast on, you're simply keeping your leg straight, but you're actually like depending on the body to fix itself. You know, somehow these bones are going to come together. Somehow, everything's going to repair. Like, so obviously we already know that dependency is there, that the potential for the body to heal itself is already there. So that, I think everyone understands the concept of regeneration. Mm-hmm. It's just our limitation so far has been developing tools that can actually help us regenerate. And that's where we come in.
Okay. Because it's very fascinating. For me, this is a new wheelhouse. But in terms of, so for me, I had a ligament injury. Okay. Do all of your stem cells do the same thing? And by that I mean, are all the stem cells that you produce the same, or would they be different depending on different medical conditions that you're trying to treat? So if someone comes in for, you mentioned, I believe it was Parkinson's disease, would you give them the same stem cell that you would give me to potentially treat a ligament?
That's a great question. And the answer here is yes.
Okay.
The stem cells that we isolate from the body are very specific stem cells. They're called mesenchymal stem cells. Now, mesenchymal stem cells are what we would call the closest to an embryonic stem cell without coming from an embryo. In that, the MSC for short can practically become any tissue in your body. Okay.
Just depending on where you put it is what it would be?
Or where it goes. Sometimes you don't even need to put the cell physically. You know what's so funny with us is we think like...
That is exactly where my mind is going.
Like in Parkinson's disease, people think, oh, well, surely you have to inject them into the brain. I mean, if you don't inject into the brain, how are you going to fix the brain? Well, is that where it truly starts? Like, do we even know? We assume. Mm-hmm. But there are also many diseases very complicated. I mean, if it wasn't, we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation, right? That we would know everything about disease and we would know how to fix it. Yeah. The reality is we don't know a lot of times how it starts, why it starts. A lot now we know has to do with, a lot actually can be pertained to what we eat and how we behave. Those are two big components. But other than like outside forces coming in, our natural bodies are also prone to degeneration as well, naturally.
Right.
This conversation applies to anyone. Athletes. When we think about athletes, we always think about people in their prime, these ultimate, athletic, just the great examples in our society that are gifted in all athletic forms. I do not have such a gift nor such a gene, but we're all aging. So whether you're in the elite category or whether you're in my category, we are all by default, by biological, the way we're designed, we are falling apart, right, as we age. And so just like that, whether you are physically injured or whether you are falling apart naturally through the aging process, we all need regeneration. So that's why this conversation pertains to everybody. Yeah.
Right. Wow. Yeah, because it's obviously a great point. I mean, my father struggles with some issues in his knee and his back. And it could be used for anyone in any condition, whether you are an athlete or not, or like you mentioned, it's just a big diverse audience of who could benefit from stem cells.
Right. And these cells, these mesenchymal stem cells that we give back to people, these particular cells can become practically any tissue in your body.
Okay.
And they can regulate the inflammation in your body. They can increase blood flow. They can stop cell death. They do all of these things. So that's why there are applications in conditions like Parkinson's. There are applications like in an ACL injury. You can see, if you just go back to the function of the cell, then you start understanding, oh, well, this cell could be helpful in these ways. So it's more of I would say more of a regenerative tool than a cure for a particular disease. But yes, to your question, in the United States, because it is regulated as a drug, it has to be for a specific condition. It has to be labeled for a specific disease.
And therefore you need to do multiple trials on multiple diseases.
With the same drug.
Yeah, with the same drug to get approval.
And each disease, just for fun, it costs about $1 billion to get through from beginning to end, and about 10 to 12 years of development time.
Wow.
So yeah.
So I see why it's taking some time.
Well, that's in the traditional landscape, and so to that, some regulations that I hope will change over time is once we start understanding the biology of these cells a little bit better, that as soon as some indications start getting approved, then they get more widely used, maybe for classes of conditions, not so much specific, because again, it's not a chemical. It's not just one pathway. It is, it's taking a more natural multi-pathway approach.
And how does the body consume a stem cell? Because I mentioned, that my first thought was that it would be injected to whatever part of the body that it's helping. But how is it consumed by the body?
So just like in your body, if you had an injury, right, stem cells are immediately deployed. Most of the time, again, stem cells are made in your bone marrow. So what will happen is the stem cells will get deployed from wherever it is into the bloodstream, and then they go travel. So your body sends the cells to that location to immediately begin the repair process.
Right.
When you inject cells in a specific area for a condition, it's normally because there's no blood flow to that area.
Right.
But true stem cells, and you know that they're true stem cells because you can actually measure. There's something called cell surface markers on every cell. You can actually identify what population you're giving people. When you identify that population of cells and the pure population, then you'll know that those cells are capable of traveling.
Okay.
So you don't have to worry so much about getting them to the right location. Your body actually does a better job of delivering the cells to the right location.
Wow.
We don't do animal research here, but back when we were trying to show where do the stem cells go, we did some biodistribution studies, which basically means that you put stem cells in the body in different models and different diseases, and you kind of track where they go. You can put a fluorescent signal on them, so you can visualize where they go in the body. And it's so interesting that in conditions like stroke, every infusion you give, the cells will go somewhere different. So the repair isn't even always in the same place.
Right.
It can be same condition, different timing. Timing is everything too. We're starting to learn, and we're sort of studying this right now to better understand delivery. But right now, all the cells that we give will be through the bloodstream. There are conditions like orthopedic conditions where there is no blood flow to a particular joint. Like if you have really bad osteoarthritis, no blood flow to that joint, then yes, in that situation, you would want to deliver the cells directly into that joint.
Okay.
Yes. And sometimes in brain conditions, we can deliver them intrathecally. That's right through into the back and goes directly into your cerebral spinal fluid. And that is to target the brain. But those are the ways that we can deliver cells.
Very interesting. And then for each patient, let me ask this a different way. If I wanted to receive stem cells, would you extract my bone marrow and then produce my own special stem cells?
So bone marrow, if you think about bone marrow as a source, and that was actually the traditional source for stem cells, in fact, so many people still study stem cells that come from bone marrow. But just like in the example I gave you, if you are sick, then the stem cells in your bone marrow are being deployed. So if you're sick and I were to grab a bone marrow, take a bone marrow sample, aspirate, and then test that, chances are there would be little to no stem cells, at least MSCs, in your bone marrow because they've all been deployed.
Okay, I see.
So that's when we realized, well, that's a pretty poor source. Imagine trying to build a company using a source that's highly unreliable.
Yeah.
And that's why we had to think of a different source. Now, out of all the sources that we could look at, what was the one thing that people are very happy to part with? Fat. Fat was sort of like a no-brainer. I mean, who wants to give skin or like pull out a tooth or there are things that you would not want to do, even blood.
Yeah. That was my first thought actually. And I would not, I don't love just giving blood. Yes, to donate, but I hate needles.
Right.
And so I wouldn't be really compelled to do that. But if I would like to get rid of excess fat and it's going to be used for someone's benefit, then of course, sign me up.
Fat, and we compared peripheral blood. If I took a pint of peripheral blood, we may be lucky if we find a single cell, a single MSC, because we're assuming that these cells are in circulation in large numbers, and they simply are not. And as we age, we don't have many. So that's also a problem. Now, fat tissue is key because fat tissue is, by definition, if you have fat, it means that MSCs are in your fat because their sole purpose in that fat is to keep your fat there. And we know that they do a good job of that. So that really is the reason why that became a source.
Wow. Yeah. And I guess obviously that's through trial and error as well. Like, what are other stem cell research companies using? Are they all also using fat tissue?
Mostly bone marrow, from what I've seen. Not a lot are using fat, but it is a great source, and we are very happy with the consistency from patient to patient. So again, in order to build an operation like this, you have to be able to, if we say, like, if the dream one day is that every athlete or every military person being deployed has their cells banked so that if they get hurt or if they're injured on the field, we'll make cells and have them ready. If that's the dream, to have a repository of our own cells to repair our bodies whenever we need them, like on demand,
yeah,
then by definition, you'll have to be able to accomplish this task for every person. And we're all built differently, right? Your cells are different than my cells, Taylor's cells. We all have different cell quality, what we call potency, right? The strength of those cells. And so all of those play a role. And that's why if we're going to make a medicine, no different than, you grabbing a bottle of Tylenol and expecting all the pills to be the same. We are also wanting to make sure that we create strong populations of cells that we know are consistent from patient to patient. That's the only way we're going to be able to say, we expect you to have this result, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a blank box. Like, we have no idea.
Yeah.
Because if we're not sure how healthy your cells are, then we have no idea if this is going to help or not, which is actually what these same day, if you've seen advertisements for stem cells in the United States, it's mostly physicians that are selling same day treatments. That means that you go into the doctor's office and they will either pull some blood or bone marrow or fat, and then do some minimal processing and give it right back to you, right in that same visit. And that largely is very limited in what that product can do because there are not many cells to begin with.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah. And so another question that I had while you were explaining that is, I assume, are you seeing that a certain type of person's stem cells are more potent? Is that the word that you used, or more?
Yes, in the sense that and it's not always this way, but in general, younger people have more cells, right? In general, younger people have healthier cells. And now that's not always the case, but that is logical, and biologically we see that pattern. And so younger people will have more active cells. Now, is active potency. In my mind, a true definition of a stem cell, right? The stem cell has to be able to differentiate or transform. They have to be able to replicate themselves. They have to do all these different things. And so we test the cell's ability to do all these different things. And that's what we call potency, right? We test that. And whether we test cells that we have produced from an 80-year-old or a 20-year-old, we see consistent results.
Okay.
But that's only just at the individual cell level.
Right.
If you want to create consistent efficacy, or if you want to be able to say, like, have a drug label that says, if you take this one dose, this is what's going to happen, and you want to be able to predict that accurately, then there is such thing as the appropriate dose. The number of cells will translate. So the volume of cells you give should translate to the efficacy that you're trying to aim for.
Okay.
Right? And so that's how we are able to create consistent batches of cells, even though they're all coming from our own bodies and have variation. At the end of the day, we even the playing field to select the healthy cells from each of us, however few they are. So there might be few to start with, but we'll make the right quantity so that what we give back is always a consistent amount.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. I'm starting to understand it a little bit better.
I hope so.
Which is my goal, yeah. Another question I have is when people come into this facility, do they also receive a same-day treatment? Like, no.
We have no such thing here.
Okay.
It takes us, so if you were to give us some fat tissue, it would take approximately 2 months for us to create a cell bank.
Okay.
And that cell bank is what will follow you for the rest of your life. From that one cell bank, we can generate unlimited quantities of stem cells on demand.
Wow.
So
it's kind of scary, but cool.
Yeah. So if you, and this is the idea, is that, like, say you were banked now, and it involves giving us 1 tablespoon of fat. That's it.
And how does that happen? Because it sounds painful. You just scoop it out. Like what's
a doctor will numb the area. It's typically a plastic surgeon. It's almost like a mini lipo. It's super fast and quick because they just numb the area, typically in like a love handle, and they'll just pull a tablespoon of fat. They suck it out manually. It doesn't hurt. It's not fun. It's not like I wish I could go get another fat extraction. It's not like that. But it's to do once in your life to secure your cells is a pretty painless process.
Right.
Enough that, and we made it this way purposely. Why a tablespoon? We made it this way so that any patient could qualify, that any patient, even if they're deathly ill, can undergo a small fat extraction like that. Okay. And so that was the whole design of the process. But yeah, we take that tablespoon of fat, we extract the MSCs, just the MSCs, and just the healthy ones, and then we'll begin growing and multiplying from that stash. And then once you're banked, anytime you need cells, so let's say you play soccer and something happens, then we get notified, we start making cells for you, have that ready for that injury. But when you're 80 and now your memory is starting to fail you and you need some help, then cells will be ready. And hopefully we can attack these conditions sooner than later. Mm-hmm. You know, the ultimate goal is to get disease in the earliest stage. Right now, we don't treat disease in the earliest stages. Mm-hmm. For instance, if you have cancer, if you discover cancer at stage 0, they're not going to give you chemo.
Right.
Right. So what's the approach? It's like, okay, we're going to wait for it to grow. Yeah. We're just going to monitor it and wait for it to grow enough to substantiate giving you this toxic drug, because then it'll justify killing those cancer cells, and we might also hurt other cells in the process.
Yeah.
So that logic is exists because our medicine has side effects. That's why. So imagine if your medicine didn't have side effects. If your medicine only had upshot, right? Then the conversation completely changes. Yeah. Then you can treat things at stage 0, which is exactly where we should be. Mm-hmm. We should be treating Alzheimer's. The Alzheimer's happens 20 to 30 years before you see your first symptom.
Wow.
So when's the best time to treat it? It's a lot easier. Imagine you have a completely wrinkled face. Is it easier to reverse that or to prevent a wrinkle in the first place? Yeah. Right? It's just simple, just example. But disease is sort of the same. So we want to be able to attack degeneration in its earliest stages. And the only way to combat degeneration is by regeneration. And that's what these cells do. So naturally and so beautifully. It's just what they do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And to your point, I did have a question are there currently any risks or potential side effects that you are aware of with patients receiving stem cells?
So this is why we do clinical trials. We've come out of this COVID era where we see, like, if things are not monitored properly, you later on discover that there are all these issues, potential issues. And so you have to do these trials, and it takes years to complete them so that you are collecting every single data point you can. And so far, what we've identified with stem cells are, at least the cells that we make here, are headache after infusion. Approximately 20% of patients will experience a headache, or like a flu-like symptom that normally resolves within 24 hours. Wow. So far, that is what we have observed. But yes, traditionally with stem cells, there have been all kinds of risks, right? There's been a long time people very concerned about, well, what if these cells cause cancer? That's a typical concern. There are certain populations of stem cells that can do that. And so you have to be very careful. You have to know exactly what you're putting back into the body to ensure that those things don't happen. Yeah.
And so here at Hope Bio, who works in the labs? What type of personnel can we expect to see?
So with bio manufacturing, we are typically hiring biology majors, biotechnology majors, and really because they have experience with cells, and so those are the people that we look for. In our research foundation, that's where we have more of a mixed bag: data and analysts, statisticians, PhDs, scientific writers, nurses, RNs. Yeah, we have RNs on both sides actually, and they help, being able to talk to patients and stuff.
And who administers the stem cells when the patient is actually coming in to receive it?
The nurses do, all supervised by the PI. It's a principal investigator, and that's normally a physician. And we will have clinical staff trained specifically to be able to perform that task.
Okay, very nice. Because then obviously a lot of people don't like going to the doctor, don't like medical procedures. Are very understandable because for the most part, there's never 100% certainty or guarantee that you will be fixed, quote unquote, or that your problem will be resolved. And so there's always a little bit of uncertainty. And so what advice would you give to somebody who is hoping to undergo a stem cell procedure, and some words of encouragement or something that would help someone feel more comfortable with receiving stem cells?
Well, I think it starts with education. I think you have to know, you should be acutely aware of what you're putting into your body. I think that's been a lesson that we've all learned. Yes. We have to be better at that. And stem cells are it is a complex conversation. And I can tell you that most of the time, physicians don't know. In medical school, they don't teach about regenerative medicine, and they don't know. No one has clinical expertise with stem cells, pretty much, and so there's a lack of knowledge in that area, and therefore, we're wanting like drug advice from our doctors, but in this area, it's hard to get qualified information, and so I would also stress that it's normally it's not a fear of getting cells that we encounter. It's more on the opposite end, this over enthusiasm for cells and wanting to get them now and willing to go overseas and to get whatever they can get their hands on because it says stem cells. Yeah. And this idea that, I'm going to get, give me stem cells from a baby. They're younger, they're healthier, and all these things. All that stuff, you have to substantiate all of those claims, right? They're not safety first. All I have to say is safety first and know what you're putting in. That will require you to learn a little bit. Mm-hmm. Okay, so lessons like what kind of cell type should you be using to fix your problem? There's a very big difference between I need a stem cell that can help regulate my blood. I'm going through chemo and my blood is looking awful. I need to regulate that versus I need to repair my ACL. Those are two different scenarios that require two different kinds of stem cell approaches. And then once you get down to understanding what kind of cell you would need, then it's trying to determine, who can produce the best quality cells, and kind of doing research on that topic. Yes. Okay. So it's a lot right now. I think that as the industry starts to really get more approvals and you start seeing these applications more readily available, then that might be a good time to jump in. Otherwise, I would say I would highly suggest participating in a clinical trial, if you can. A good clinical trial here in the US, rather than going somewhere else. I think I would recommend that first. Then at least that safety is being monitored carefully and things like this. So
yeah, because you mentioned that people are going, out of the country to receive stem cells, which I've heard of as well, which especially in athletes, just hopping on a flight down to Mexico or hopping across the pond to Europe. Why do you think that is? Is it because it's approved there, it's legal there, they're not participating in a clinical trial and it's readily available?
I say the answer that the reason why people go is because it is not illegal, and 2, because they want access now.
Right.
But the fundamental question is what are they wanting access to? Largely, they don't know, right? That they're going for this idea that this place has these cells that I think can help me. It's a toss-up, right? You just don't know, and so the reason for regulation, and again, there needs to be reform in that regulation, but the population of cells, identifying the population cells and the health of those cells it's absolutely critical to know that. Almost every patient I've interacted with who has gone overseas cannot tell me or produce any paper as to what it is that they received. They don't know.
Oh, gosh.
They tell you, oh, I got healthy, baby cells or whatever they say, but there's no way to confirm. Right?
And here we confirm that.
Oh yeah, yes, a zillion times over. That's what makes life so difficult, and that's what makes it so hard, and that's why options are so limited right now because of that. But eventually, and that's why I think if you want access now, try to get into a clinical trial for your condition. And if you can't get into a trial for whatever reason, then yes, I think solutions are on the horizon. Right. I know it doesn't seem like it's happening quick enough, but solutions are on the horizon.
So you probed another question with something that you just mentioned, but what would deny somebody from being able to participate in a clinical trial?
So every clinical trial has specific inclusion and exclusion criteria. It means the inclusion criteria are all the criteria that you need to qualify someone to participate in a trial. Exclusion are all the things that you cannot have. Like, for example, if you're pregnant or lactating, chances are you're not going to be able to participate in a trial. So, so you would have to go through, and a source for clinical trials is clinicaltrials.gov. All the clinical trials that have been at least approved by FDA are on that website. So in the search is pretty simple. You put your condition. So if your condition is Parkinson's, you put that in, and then you can in the other keyword you could just put stem cells, and it'll pull up every stem cell trial related to Parkinson's.
Okay, wow.
Yeah. And then you can kind of see where there's a trial near you.
So when somebody comes into Hope, is it an in-person examination, or is it something that I could go online and I could fill out some sort of application and read the regulations? How is it? How does the approval process look?
So there are two parts to this, right? The first is the banking. Right. If you want to bank your cells, anybody can commercially do that.
Okay.
They don't even have to walk in here. They can just simply sign up online. We have to do a blood test. You have to be negative for HIV, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and syphilis.
Okay.
If you're clear for those 4, then we can go ahead and schedule you for a fat extraction. This is entirely, again, commercial. Anybody who wants to bank their cells can do that today.
Okay.
We have a lot of people doing that, from professional athletes to, my entire family is banked. Every employee here at Hope Bio is banked at 1 year. At 1 year anniversary, they all get their cells banked. And it's just a model that we think is going to start growing. So commercially, that's available. Now, how do you access those cells? So access has to happen in the form of a clinical trial. Again, when we think about clinical trials today, we think about trials for disease. Like, oh, well, I don't have a particular disease. Well, we are in a new generation of trials. Like if we're trying to understand how cells will be used for prevention, then soon enough there are going to be trials for prevention. And those are excellent trials to participate in, right? Which would mean that healthy, qualified people would have to participate. So yeah, it's we're in a new age, a completely new age. So that's how people can access. And then of course if God forbid something terrible happened, in those instances, you do have access, right, under the current law. So that also makes them accessible. And, because we know what these cells can do, we are very confident about the application, about where you could use them. Like there's no shortage in usage. Again, every person could benefit from their own cells, but translating that, like making cells actually usable has been the challenge. And so that's where we've come in. We've sort of bridged that gap, allowing us to finally find good cells and now make them on demand and have them delivered to your doctor when you need them.
Very interesting. Yeah. And here you replicate them, right? You duplicate them, the good ones, and then save them, and then I guess send them to whoever.
That's exactly right.
Wow. Yeah. And so if I were to get banked, or anybody who gets banked, where are those cells stored?
Right here.
All of them.
All of them.
You might need to expand the facilities.
Which we're in the process of doing. I mean, it is, yes, banking has taken off. And that, I remember when it was just an idea, and it was sort of like, well, why would anyone bank if there's no real reason to use it, or if there's no way to use it, right? And I think now it's becoming more and more obvious, at least for us, because we see it all the time, the plethora of uses. And we think that list is only going to get longer. And the future of medicine is going to look completely different than it is today.
Yeah.
Right now, these cells, we're using these cells in their pure form. Exactly the way we take them out of you, we're going to put them right back in. Like we're not altering them in any way, but there are other technologies that do that, that do alter the cells. Or for instance, like, if you have, like in diabetes, right now they're taking iPS cells, which are essentially these cells, making them more embryonic-like, and then differentiating them into insulin-producing cells and giving them back in diabetes cases.
Oh, wow.
That is happening right now. And that is what we call like highly manipulated, because they are differentiated. So what we're putting back in isn't exactly what we took out of you. But those are sort of next generation applications that people are working on that have shown success, early success. And so I think that's like one avenue. I mean, think about how many people can't wait for a organ donation, right? Yeah. Are there implications with these cells in being able to create our own organs, or using existing scaffolds and building organs? Yes, absolutely. So those are all like secondary applications, but all have to start with healthy, good cells.
Okay.
So fundamentally, you need healthy, good cells.
Yeah.
And that's what's been sort of the missing piece to this puzzle. And so that's where we come in.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so just to clarify here, there's no modification or manipulation of the cell. You're simply storing and duplicating the good cells. Okay.
So you have a repository of your own MSCs for life.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. You're nice. And I can see why people are doing it initially for preventative reasons. And then once, obviously with more research, and if people are in trials, then yes, it would be great to have more on hand.
Right.
Yeah.
A good example of this is in football. Okay. And I heard that the same thing applies in soccer. There's a lot of head injuries that happen in soccer as well. So right now we use these cells for a traumatic brain injury. Now, traumatic brain injury is typically a much more severe version of a concussion, right? Yeah. That typically in NFL games or even college games, you see the head head trauma happening regularly. Now, whether it's diagnosed as a concussion or not is secondary, but the fact that their brain is being rattled around in that helmet means that micro injury is happening constantly, right? So whether you're able to measure the threshold of a concussion or a traumatic brain injury, that trauma should be dealt with, right? Again, this is kind of dealing with things at the earliest stage.
Yeah.
Why wait for these things to pile on top of each other? Yeah. And that's what we do right now. We kind of wait and we see. And we know that things like CT and these conditions will become problems later on. Mm-hmm. So if you have cells banked, then theoretically, after every game, you get an IV, mm-hmm. right? So that means, well, how many games is a professional player going to play in their lifetime? Maybe from the time of college all the way up to, their professional career. That's a lot of games, right? Yeah. So that means you need a technology built to be able to accommodate that sort of lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
And I do think that with better technologies, especially in imaging and everything we understand, we're only going to know more about the negative impacts of these things, right?
Yeah.
And who wants to take away sports? Nobody, right?
Yeah. But football is so gruesome, and just the injuries in football are really, really bad.
And if we knew everything, we would never let our kids play. Yeah. There would be no future in that sport, right? Mm-hmm. So in order for these things to happen, like Dan, my husband, loves watching UFC, and I just I cannot watch it. I just, my heart is like falling out of my chest. And just because I just look at everything like these massive injuries that have no solution on the back end, right? You have to be able to mitigate these things beforehand to play responsibly.
Yeah.
That's what it will come down to.
Yeah.
So we have to get on board sooner than later.
Yeah. And I can somewhat relate, because as a soccer player who's been injured twice, I've had the same injury, different knees. Mm. I do want to preserve my body and prevent injuries. And, God granted I can play again. I don't want to risk another injury. I know that's always possible, but I would love to mitigate the risk, or be able to prevent it, or be able to just be like one step closer, so that I know that I am repairing my body instead of just helping it deteriorate.
Right. Yeah. And that's where we should be, that we should have access. So we're working on that. Mm-hmm. We'll get there. But that's the goal, that, we shouldn't have to wait for degeneration or injury. We should be able to understand. We know enough scientifically and medically that we know even the small injuries matter.
Yes.
And they need to be treated.
Yeah.
Again, is your medicine safe to give in those early stages? Mm-hmm. That's the question. So with stem cells and your own stem cells, where the risk is null, that is really where I think we'll see a lot of applications in the future, hopefully in the near future.
Yeah. And I really, to your point that you made earlier on, in what we put into our body is important. It's anything from, obviously, from food, from what we consume, what drugs we do use currently. But it is so important to treat our bodies. And so I really like this concept. I have a better understanding of it now, of, banking stem cells, and then being able to, game by game or season by season, just like you're slowly repairing your body as you go on.
Yeah.
That's very forward thinking, especially for athletes and coaches. So for coaches and athletes who are interested in banking their stem cells, what advice would you give to them if they're just looking around? I'm assuming you have them inform themselves, but what other steps would you suggest that they take if they're interested in it?
Interested in banking?
Well, just interested in in banking. But they see, for me, for example, I've seen other athletes go to different countries, and now I'm interested. I'm like, oh, how do I get involved in this?
So I think to be like forward thinking, I think you have to look beyond like your current situation. Okay. A lot of times we get caught up in like, well, I hurt now, right here, right now. This is what I want to fix. But most of the time, disease, whether we're dealing with chronic disease or whether we're dealing with injury, it's not a one-shot fixes all. It's rarely that case. Even in very simple muscle tears and things that you would think, 100 million cells here should do the trick. Just like what you talked about, the risk of getting re-injured, you can repair something somewhat, but it's still weak, right? And so to adequately repair something and to completely fix something or to put someone in remission, it requires repeated treatment. That's the logic behind what we now know. We know that degeneration is a mechanism that's constantly happening. By default in our age, we are constantly degenerating. So if we need to continuously regenerate, then we have to be able to repeat treatment. So I would encourage, if you are looking at, banking your stem cells or looking into any of these kind of technologies, you have to make sure that whatever you're banking into is repeatable. It can't be a one-off.
Right.
There are so many places where they'll say, well, give us some of your fat or give us some of your tissue and we're going to store it for you. And that's stem cell banking. Think about like cord blood. Pregnant people have been told, bank your cord blood. Okay, why? What is in there? What kind of cells are in there that's going to provide a benefit? And if so, how many cells, and are they repeatable? And once you start answering these questions, you'll soon realize that there are very few options when it comes to actual usable cells. And so, I'd say I'm highly biased, but I know that what we produce here is repeatable and has been. There have been people, like great example, like spinal cord injury. If something terrible happened and you had spinal cord injury, how many cells is it going to take to repair that? Well, we know now that it's upwards of 50 infusions. It's 50 infusions of 200 million cells each. So it's a lot. It requires a ton of cells. The only way to do this without ever having to go back into your body constantly or getting foreign cells is to use your own, So that's if we really want to solve big problems, we need a technology to be able to deal with that. And that technology will also be able to help us deal with the everyday issues and also what will be required for prevention.
Okay. And so also here, because I know that it's not just, let me rewind. You mentioned that your background is in biotechnology. What type of technology are we using here in this facility that is new or different than any other stem cell research lab?
That's a great question.
If you can tell your secrets.
Well, so what we do here, again, is not changing any cells. We're literally taking what you have as a prototype and we're making copies.
Got it. That's
called cell culture. And if you have grown mold in your kitchen, it's the same, you feed the cells the right things and they will proliferate and they will grow. So cell culture is just the multiplication of the cells without any changes. But when cells are outside of your body, they naturally want to change. So when cells are outside of your body, and the reason why they're so good at repairing an ACL is because they naturally want to become fibroblasts, which are ligament type cells. And when they're growing, like when they're multiplying, they start sticking together because they start secreting something called extracellular matrices that make them very sticky. This is a collagen. This is basically collagen that's holding the cells together. So this is great. This structure is great because if you want to, again, repair that ACL, that's exactly what you want. But if you're trying to fix Parkinson's and you need these cells to stay small and go into your bloodstream and somehow make it up to your brain and do whatever they need to become dopamine forming neurons or whatever it is that they need to do, they have to be able to do that. And so in the lab, it's been a challenge to kind of reverse or solve for the traditional challenges of cell culture, which is exactly that. The cells will they also become big because they got to fill in the gaps. So big, sticky cells that are ligament type cells aren't going to fix the diseases we're talking about.
Right.
And that's the biggest challenge, to get the cells to stop doing that outside the body and to stay exactly the same as how we found them to begin with. So that's been our goal, and that's how we built the technology that we have here, is to literally keep you the same.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming, but is it expensive technology?
It is. It is. Well, first, by default, every batch we make, right?
And how much is a batch?
Right now, it is a little under $5,000.
Okay, but how much quantity?
That's 200 million cells.
Wow.
That we produce at one time, and we have done so much to bring this cost down. If anyone says that this is expensive in relation to other cellular therapies that are made for each person, so they're individualized therapies, they're personalized therapies. In other words, that dose I make can't be used for somebody else. It's only for you. Right. That is normally a very expensive proposition. So expensive that it's not what they say. It can never become a business. They can't market it. It'll never work because it will be priced out.
Right.
Well, right now we have the pricing at a point where we can be competitive to the off-the-shelf drugs. And that is the power in this, that the only way that we can compete in this space is to make sure that we have an affordable. None of this matters if we can only do this sometimes. Right. Or if it's too expensive. This doesn't matter. Yeah. So the only way this is going to work is for the cost to be affordable and reasonable. And so in comparison to all the other biologics that are available, we are right in there. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have learned so much today. I felt like I was back in my freshman year biology classes, and it's a whole new language to me. But I really appreciate your analogies and your willingness to explain, because I've truly learned so much. And I hope that anybody listening did as well.
I hope so.
The way that I like to conclude my podcast is usually by giving the guest the floor to, in your case, you could give a shout out, but you could also give advice or explain something just to make sure that whoever's listening has a takeaway that you want them to have.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, I think just in the theme of like, let's do better for ourselves, right? Let's be more conscientious of what we're putting in. Let's get involved in understanding what are the implications of these drugs that we're taking right now, and how are we solving for disease. I think the more conversation that happens, and the more the general population gets involved in this, that we're not dependent on our doctors to give us this information, but that we start really getting involved, I think that this will become something on the forefront. You know, a lot of us get frustrated like how long this is taking and why reform isn't happening. But reform starts with the people, right? There has to be complaints. There has to be conversation. This should be the number one topic in the political arena too, right? Because healthcare is the most important conversation, right?
Yeah, I agree.
More than anything else. I mean,
it's your livelihood. It's in your life.
It's everything. Yeah. So health is the most important topic, and so we should be vested in it. And so I encourage everyone to learn more. I know stem cells seems daunting and seems complicated, but fundamentally it's actually very simple biology. And so the general population that I educate are people in their 70s and 80s. And so it's something that everyone can understand. And I think we should all be really interested in. So, yeah.
And I appreciate what you just said. And I agree with it as well, because I came in thinking it was daunting and it's a foreign topic, foreign language for me. But it really is very simple. Yeah. And helpful. Thank you so much.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. I appreciate you. And if anybody wants to connect with Miss Donna or Taylor, they're incredible social media videographer. Anything you see on the website and the videos are from Taylor, the best producer, right? And you guys have a podcast as well.
We do.
And what is it called, actually?
Well, we have I host a podcast on the Hope Bio side. It's called Stem Cell Revolution.
Okay.
And then our foundation also has a podcast called the Hopeful News Network.
Perfect.
And they're giving updates on all the clinical applications. Our podcast is more geared towards around everything stem cells. And so right now we're talking about the legality of stem cells and kind of going through all the regulations. So if you like deep dive stuff, that's a good podcast to listen to.
Yeah, and we'll link that below and put it in the description so that anyone that can find you or they're more interested about learning more, they know where to go.
Great.
But thank you again for inviting me into your beautiful home. I can't wait to have a tour. And I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
Bye.
Bye.